At a busy Nashville truck stop, Detective Miller scanned the rows of parked big rigs. His eyes settled on Bruce D. Mendenhall, seated calmly in the cab of his truck. The detective approached cautiously and knocked on the window. It all began with Samantha Winters, a young woman whose lifeless body had been found discarded like trash. She was naked, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, with a gunshot wound in her head. Her death was a chilling echo of another victim, Sarah Nicole Hulbert, discovered under eerily similar circumstances not long after. And these weren't isolated incidents. The authorities had grimly tallied 850 similar cases across the United States, linking them to long-haul truck drivers. Finally, here in Nashville, they had their suspect in sight. Detective Miller approached Mendenhall. "Are you the person we've been looking for?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mendenhall's response was unsettling. "If you say so," he shrugged. What they uncovered in Mendenhall's truck was gruesome, a range of tools that investigators dubbed a killing chamber. There were rifles, handcuffs, tape, latex gloves, and sex toys. And, hidden in a bag, were blood-stained clothes. The evidence spoke volumes. DNA from the clothing tied Mendenhall to multiple murders, including Karma Papura, a mother of two whose remains were discovered miles away from where she was last seen. Despite their findings, Mendenhall remained tight-lipped about the locations of his victims' bodies, prolonging the agony for their families. Mendenhall was seemingly ordinary. He was a family man from Illinois and was married with daughters. He was convicted in one murder and is charged with the murders of 3 other women at truck stops in Alabama, Indiana, and Tennessee. He is still under investigation for murders in Georgia, Illinois, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. His case drew attention to a broader phenomenon, the dark underbelly of trucking routes crisscrossing America, where vulnerable women, often sex workers, and trafficked women, fell prey to serial killers like him. The investigation, led by the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative, revealed a disturbing pattern of violence spanning decades. One notorious trucker, Robert Ben Rhodes, built a torture chamber in the back of his truck. He kidnapped, raped, tortured, and killed as many as 50 women. Rhodes was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa, on November 22, 1945. He was raised by his mother in the early years of his life, since his father was a soldier in the United States Army and was stationed in West Germany. Rhodes' upbringing was relatively normal, but he had a few scuffles with the law when he was arrested in 1961 at the age of 16 for tampering with a vehicle, and he was arrested again for public fighting a year later. After graduating high school in 1964, Rhodes joined the Marine Corps, but was dishonorably discharged after he got involved with a robbery. During this time, his father was convicted of SAing a 12-year-old girl, and he committed suicide while awaiting trial. Rhodes married 3 times and had a son with his first wife. He bounced from job to job before becoming a truck driver. In the 1980s, he developed an interest in BDSM and faced abuse allegations against his third wife, Deborah. But it was during the 90s when Rhodes took his crimes to the next level. On October 26, 1990, deer hunters discovered skeletal remains in Millard County, Utah. At the time, the victim could not be identified and was known under the name Jane Doe 1 for the next 13 years. It wasn't until May 2003 when forensic scientists were able to identify her as 24-year-old Patricia Candace Walsh. Walsh and her 26-year-old husband Douglas Scott Zukowski, both from Seattle, went missing shortly after leaving the city in 1989. Zukowski's remains were discovered in January 1990 in Ozona, Texas, near Interstate 10, and he was identified in 1992. After Walsh was identified, representatives from the Utah State Police Department contacted their colleagues from the Texas Ranger Division, but the investigation did not identify their killer. After his arrest, Rhodes confessed to their murders. He claimed that the couple were hitchhiking when Rhodes picked them up in his truck while on a long-haul journey. He immediately killed the husband, Zukowski, and dumped his body in Sutton County, Texas, where it was later found. He kept Walsh for over a week, and during this time he tortured and SA'd her numerous times before killing her and dumping her body in Millard County, Utah. Less than a month after Walsh's death, he abducted an 18-year-old victim, Shanna Holtz, who escaped and informed police. When Rhodes was detained, the victim declined to press charges, feeling that she would not be believed despite extensive evidence. In her statement to police, she said, "I don't see any good in filing charges. It's just going to be my word against his. If there was any evidence I would file charges and sue him." It was later asserted that she was fearful of Rhodes after enduring 2 weeks in his truck. Rhodes had converted the sleeper cab of his truck into his own personal torture chamber, where he kept women, sometimes for weeks, torturing and SAing them. Regina K. Walters, who was just 14 years old, was found naked and badly decomposed on September 29, 1990, in the loft of an abandoned bar near Greenville, Illinois. She had been missing since February 3, 1990, when she ran away from her home in Pasadena, Texas with her boyfriend, 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones. An autopsy revealed she had been strangled to death sometime in early March. A photograph of Walters being tortured was found in the home of Rhodes. On May 26, 1990, the partial skeleton of Jones was found near Harlton, Texas. He had been shot in the head. In the early morning of April 1, 1990, Trooper Mike Miller of the Arizona Highway Patrol found a truck with its hazard lights on the side of Interstate 10 near Casa Grande, Arizona. When he investigated inside the cab, he discovered a naked woman, handcuffed and screaming. There was also a male present who identified himself as the driver of the truck. After failing to talk his way out of the situation, Rhodes turned over a gun that had been on his person. He was arrested and charged with aggravated assault, SA, and unlawful imprisonment. He was left handcuffed in Miller's patrol car, but nearly escaped. After further investigation, the arresting detective, Nick Barnhart, was able to make a connection to the Houston case and noticed a pattern stretching over the course of at least 5 months. In executing a search warrant for Rhodes' home, police found photos of a naked teenager who was later identified as Walters, whose body had been found in September 1990. Also present were photos of Walsh, whose body was discovered that October. In 1994, Rhodes was convicted of first-degree murder for killing Regina K. Walters and received a life sentence without parole. He was extradited to Utah in 2005 to face trial for the murders of Candace Walsh and Douglas Sikowski. However, at the request of the victims' families, the charges were dropped in 2006 to spare them from testifying twice in different states. Rhodes was then returned to prison. Later, he was extradited to Texas to stand trial for the murders of Walters and Jones. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Rhodes pleaded guilty to both deaths and received a second life sentence. Delmas Colvin was born on August 3, 1959 in Akron, Ohio. Colvin's childhood was typical, though he began experiencing conflict with his mother during his teenage years, without showing signs of aggressive behavior. In high school, Colvin participated in wrestling and football, and after graduating, he became a driver and later worked as a taxi driver in Atlantic City. In the mid-1980s, Colvin began exhibiting antisocial behavior, and in 1989, he was arrested in Summit County on charges of assault and illegal weapons possession, resulting in a 15-year prison sentence. But he was paroled in 1992, but then he was jailed again in July 1993 for violating his parole. After his release in 1996, he moved to Toledo and found work as a truck driver. In the following years, Colvin's behavior grew increasingly impulsive and violent towards women. In April 2004, he was arrested after a woman reported that Colvin had kidnapped her from a truck stop, robbed, beaten, and attempted to SA her before she managed to escape. During the investigation, DNA samples were taken from Colvin to determine if he had committed other similar crimes. And as it turned out, he had. In November 2005, based on DNA analysis results, Delmas Colvin was charged with the murders of 2 women, 33-year-old Jackie Simpson and 37-year-old Melissa Weber, who were killed in Toledo on April 16 and May 9, 2003, respectively. Additionally, he was charged with a rape that occurred the same year. In September 2006, Colvin stood trial for the murders. He pleaded guilty to the murders of Simpson and Weber, as well as 3 others. According to his testimony, in January 2000, he lured 38-year-old Valerie Jones into his truck, strangled her, and dumped her body in Lake Erie. On September 1st, he lured 42-year-old Jacqueline Thomas into his truck, SA'd, and killed her. Her body was found the next day in Monroe County. He also killed 43-year-old Lily Summers, whom he had previously offered money for sex. Her body was found in April 2002. On October 3, 2006, Colvin unexpectedly confessed to another murder, admitting his involvement in the murder of 40-year-old Dorothea Wetzel, whose body was found on August 5, 2000 on the banks of the Maumee River in southern Toledo. During interrogation, Colvin stated that his motive for the killings was misogyny, caused by sexual complexes and an inferiority complex. In October, based on the plea bargain with the death penalty off the table, he was given several life sentences. But his convictions didn't stop there. In June 2010, Colvin was charged with the cold case murder of 27-year-old Donna Lee White, who was killed on September 15, 1987 in Atlantic City. Colvin was extradited to New Jersey, where he appeared before the court in April 2011. During the trial, he pleaded guilty to White's murder, claiming to have met her while working as a taxi driver. He invited her to his apartment to drink and have sex, to which she supposedly agreed. Later, when she overdosed on drugs, he strangled her with a plastic bag and dumped her body on the outskirts of the city. In April 2011, Colvin was convicted of White's murder and received an additional 30 years imprisonment to be served concurrently with his life sentences. Delmas Colvin, when asked about the murders, said he slept well at night. Timothy J. Vafades, infamously known as the Vampire Trucker, abducted multiple women over the years, holding them captive in the sleeper berth of his truck. He SA'd and beat them, even filing some of their teeth into fangs and forcing some to marry him. Vafades was reportedly obsessed with the Twilight movie and books, and he named his trucking company the Twilight Express. In 2013, Vafades invited a 19-year-old woman to stay with him and help with his trucking company. Instead, he SA'd her and began beating her regularly. These beatings escalated to strangulation, with Vafades choking her until she lost consciousness. These acts continued the entire time she was with him, and he had confiscated her driver's license, social security card, cell phone, and SIM card, making escape impossible. Luckily, a state trooper recognized her, and she was rescued. But there were more victims. There are 6 that police know of, and each of these women were forced to live in his truck, shower with him, and he didn't let them leave his side at truck stops. He SA'd and beat all of them, and forced 4 of them to marry him. He was also caught with child SA material. In November 2016, Vafades was sentenced to 20 years in prison. There are approximately 1 million truck drivers in the United States traveling miles across the country delivering goods. The FBI alleges that there could be 450 to 500 truck drivers who are committing murders along America's roads. 25 of them have already been arrested, but many more are still out there. It's estimated that there are 850 victims, mostly women who are trafficked or working in the sex trade. The FBI says the victims in these cases are primarily women who are living high-risk, transient lifestyles, often involving substance abuse and prostitution. They're frequently picked up at truck stops or service stations and SA'd, murdered, and dumped along the highways. Highway Serial Killings Initiative was created by the FBI in 2009 to raise awareness among law enforcement agencies and the general public about this issue. This map, created by the Highway Serial Killings Initiative, is covered with red dots marking the 500 locations where bodies have been discovered along America's highways over the past 30 years. We can see that many of these cases trace a horizontal path across the southern and central regions of the US, following Interstate 40. This highway stretches from Wilmington, North Carolina, all the way to Barstow, California. But solving these murders is a logistical nightmare. The truck drivers will pick up or kidnap the victim in one state, murder them in another, and dump their body in a third jurisdiction. It's a lot of miles to cover, and the bodies aren't always found. Around 200 of these 850 murders are unsolved. Disturbingly, some women's remains have been found in trash cans at truck stops, and others have been tossed to the side of the road. The FBI said the suspects are predominantly long-haul truck drivers, but the mobile nature of the offenders, the unsafe lifestyles of the victims, the significant distances and multiple jurisdictions involved, and the scarcity of witnesses or forensic evidence can make these cases tough to solve. Long-haul trucking is an extremely isolating job. For days and weeks on end, truckers spend most of their time alone. Drinking is prevalent, and so is depression. But for some people, the isolation is appealing. If someone wants to kill, it's the perfect profession.